Ladies and gentlemen, welcome wrestling fans worldwide to Knoxville and the Great Smoky Mountains for the Ron Fuller, Tennessee Studcast.
6 feet 9 inches tall, 265 pounds.
This historic podcast from one of the most respected and successful wrestlers and promoters will follow the footsteps of the largest and oldest wrestling family on the planet.
Listen to what I'm saying. That's right. Bring that camera in here a little bit closer.
Through 93 years and 4 generations.
The stud has arrived.
Old school or new fan, this unique broadcast will educate and captivate as Ron details decades of professional wrestling's growth with truly unforgettable stories.
I want those people out there at home to hear the stud.
Sit back and enjoy the ride with the Tennessee Stud.
The Tennessee Stud. You will learn that name. You will remember it.
And now,
the stud is here.
Hey everybody, welcome in. It's time to do it again. It's another Studcast with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller. This is the story of wrestling in America as told by the stud, whose family started the profession 100 years ago. So now, let's step back into the ring and back into time as we get wall-to-wall and treetop tall with the Tennessee Stud, Ron Fuller, in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. So, Ron, are the folks flocking into Tennessee for vacation time now? I bet they are.
Oh, yeah, man. Wow. The traffic is pretty brutal, man. I guess the school's out. And it's time to get all those kids packed into the car and out on that first vacation.
Yeah, you got local folks who were there getting out of school that live there, and then you got, well, the Great Smoky Mountains, the most visited national park, I think, probably in the world, no doubt.
Yeah, I know it's the busiest in America.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
And it probably is. I think we as Americans take a lot of vacations. Probably more than most countries. We get out there and see the beauty, and wow, it's pretty. And it is a beautiful part of the world here.
Man, anytime I have an opportunity to head that way, I definitely want to be in the automobile on go. All right, so listen, Stud, now every Studcast now, it seems like, is absolutely loaded with facts about what was happening in both Southeastern territories back in 1979. So I'm sure most of that information was getting out there via your old saying. I love when you used to say this. Maybe you'll keep saying it occasionally. Telephone, telegraph, telegram, or tell a wrestler.
Yeah, well, that was exactly the case, man. On the third Friday of June, 1979. And that's the week we're going to be talking about today. And wrestlers' telephones across the country, man, were busy with the news of a new wrestling war. They love to talk about that stuff, man. And this war was so new, no one knew. They didn't really exactly know who was who and who's on whose side. So all that was known at this point was what was on the flyer that the Knoxville Five had left on the cars of the fans that attended the last Studcast, the Southeastern matches in our last Studcast. And the flyer was left on those cars. And basically they knew that this company was going to be called All-Star Wrestling. Their first show was going to be on Saturday night, June the 16th, 1979, at the Chilhowee Park Amphitheater.
And really, that's kind of a downer that it had to be for you. 5 years put into building, if not the best territory ever, certainly one of the best ever, no doubt. At this point, Ron, did you think that you're starting the second territory a year earlier could have anything to do with what was happening in Knoxville?
Well, that's a great question, man. And I questioned everything that could be the cause and trying to figure this out. Southeastern Gulf Coast, when we opened it in March 1978, obviously it lured me away from the Knoxville territory. I wanted to go down there. I wanted to be there for the start of it. I wanted to handle it myself. And I had spent much of the Gulf Coast first year, almost 2 years at this point, working there. I'd been down there at this point in time about 2 years, most of the time in that Gulf Coast territory. And it had started slowly. That business was really down when when we purchased it. But it caught on fire, man, in the summer of 1978, and it remained strong right on into the first part of 1979. And that's when my brother, Robert, told me my father and his partner, Jerry, had asked him to take over the booking for them because they were basically in trouble in the Memphis territory. Robert, who was booking Gulf Coast at that time, and I agreed about his leaving. And he had an arrangement with them, a financial agreement with them. I told him that would be fine. I thought he needed to make sure that he kept it. And I was also sent many other important Gulf Coast stars down there with him, off to Memphis with him to help them out, just to make sure that they were going to be successful. So by April of 1979, my new Gulf Coast booker, who was a guy named Louis Tillett, had known him for years. He was a booker in Florida at one point. He had brought in some really good talent by April of 1979. By June of 1979, he had the Gulf Coast territory rocking, man. Actually, they were drawing more fans than the Tennessee territory. So to answer your question, Dave, and I think basically it's a simple answer. My second territory, I don't think had anything at all to do with my wrestling war. My mistake that caused all of it was real simple. And that was that I hired the wrong booker in Knoxville in September of 1978. Bob Roop's hiring was the cause of all my problems, man. And if I'd only known what he tried to do in Royshire, San Francisco territory, when he got the booking job there a couple of years earlier, I would have never hired him. I wouldn't even have hired him as a wrestler, much less a booker. So, but without knowing it, I basically threw a rotten apple into my barrel full of great talent that I had developed. And 9 months later, he rotted 4 of those apples. They went with him.
Sometimes it will mess up the whole bunch. So it's kind of descriptive, a descriptive way of saying what you believe to be the real cause of the Knoxville War, and I agree. So I know we have a lot of ground to cover in this one, Stud. So we're saddled up. We got the sandwiches ready. The war is starting. Gulf Coast is doing well. So where do we ride today?
Well, I think we're going to begin, man, with Southeastern Knoxville again. There was just so much happening so fast there. It's going to take a little while to kind of explain everything in this Studcast. I think, this Studcast, we're going to cover not just Southeastern's card, but we're going to cover the new promotions, All-Stars card as well. We're even going to throw in some Memphis information. It's going to be very important to this old Knoxville territory and this war situation. So then we'll discuss the Southeastern TV show, the one promoting the Friday night, June the 15th, 1979 event. The results, we'll talk about the results of those matches. We'll talk about the attendance. And then we're going to return to Chilhowie Park. The night after us, we're going to be talking about the All-Star Wrestling card that opened up their first night. So I ride south into Southeastern Gulf Coast, man. By the time we get there and finish with this Knoxville situation, it'll be a real pleasure compared to Knoxville. So business there still was doing very well, but we were going to be losing Ox Baker to Japan for almost 6 weeks. Hulk was soon going to become Southeastern champion, and his biggest rival was going to be Austin Idol, who was at this point a very competent heel, a darn good heel. So we will discuss Terry the Hulk Boulder's last week with Ox in this one, and how important it was for the young Hulk to get these big wins that week. And we'll talk about the card there down in the Southeastern Gulf Coast. TV show promoted it, the results of those matches down there, and the attendance in all 3 of the major cities. And then with time permitting, we may have another learning tree question.
All right, I hope we got time to work that in. All right, so it sounds like we're going to be loaded today on this Studcast, so we better get our spurs on and get this ride started. So how about the card? Why don't we start Chilhowie Park's Amphitheater Friday night, June 15th, 1979.
Well, that's a great place to do it, man. It had 7 matches on that card, and many of them were important returning stars that had not been there for quite a while. The opening match was David Schultz, Dr. D, and Eddie Mansfield, I'm sorry. And they were calling themselves at that point the Hollywood Connection, and they were going against Dean Ho and Eddie Sullivan, who was that guy from the hill from down in Southeastern Gulf Coast that now is going to be working some in Tennessee as a babyface. So Mr. Fuji was on his second Knoxville show since returning from Memphis full time because of the war. You know, this war was starting. I was starting to call in the talent again to get my people back. And he was facing another talent from the Gulf Coast territory, Burrhead Jones, who making a very rare appearance up in the Knoxville area. Then the great Tor Tanaka was also returning from Memphis full time because of the war again. And he was wrestling a newcomer that this is going to be the first time we'd had to look at him, who's going to become a great wrestler down the road, Chick Donovan. Kevin Sullivan was defending the United States Junior Heavyweight Championship versus the man who had won it many times already. Tony Charles was the third wrestler back on this card, also leaving Memphis for good, and they weren't going to be going back to Memphis. The real Southeastern champion, Alexis Smirnoff, who was now managed by Gorgeous George Jr., was defending the new belt against the extremely popular Jimmy Golden, the fourth wrestler on this card, not going back to Memphis. Then there were two main events on it, both semifinal matches, where only four wrestlers left in the tournament for the beautiful Bayliner boat. And then the first match, the semifinal match, Crusher Blackwell was going to be meeting Dick Slater, and basically a babyface match. They were both babyfaces. They were going to see to which one would be wrestling for the boat the following week. And then the main event that night, last match, was me against the Mongolian Stomper, managed by Gorgeous George Jr. A couple of more guys that have returned. And we're going to find out who the finalist is going to be for the boat on the next week. And then you can add both the Mongolian Stomper and Gorgeous George Jr. to that group that's coming out of Memphis that's not going to be returning. So that made a total of 6 new, recognizable, and important stars added to the Knoxville card and the cruise because of the upcoming war.
All right, so how and why was this happening?
Well, basically, there were 2 reasons, Dave. This was the start of the Knoxville War, obviously, and a war for survival of the territory. This is basically what it was. Are we going to be able to win this, keep the Knoxville territory in one piece? So what's going to happen here? And all these guys, these 6 guys that I just talked about, they were veterans, man. They were coming home to the territory they loved. And every one of those guys was willing not just to come home, but willing for the fight to win the battle for the territory. And then the second reason was because their extremely successful run in the Memphis territory was over. The Memphis owners had decided to abruptly change the financial deal that was made at the very beginning when Rob went to book for them and we started sending them talent. They decided to change that deal before, the first Southeastern wrestler even left for Memphis, the deal was made. So all the stars that had been sent there, including the 6 that were on this next card, one we just talked about, this card, like their booker, my brother Robert, they uprooted their families. They left the Southeastern territories because they were asked to by me to help rebuild the Memphis territory. So when the cities there, they were all dead, they got there, they started selling out. By the time we're in June, late May of 1979, and then they found out, that their payoffs were going to be cut significantly, as the owners, wanted to make a bigger profit for themselves. Basically, that's all there was to it. And so the fact that my father and Jerry Jarrett's territory, because of the great talent we had sitting there, they began to see the biggest houses that they had seen in years in that territory. And they got, just to be blunt about it, they got greedy. So they chose to break the deal that they had with Rob and I. They insisted, we had insisted when they went there that they were going to pay 28% of the gross houses to the wrestlers and that Rob was going to do the payoffs to make sure that happened. And then they decided that they didn't want to do that anymore. They wanted to cut that to 22% from 28%. They fired Rob as a booker. because Rob said, no, I'm not going to do it. I mean, it's not the deal. We built your territory back, and now you don't want to pay them anymore.
Wow.
So crazy, huh, Dave?
I don't know. It doesn't sound real. I mean, I remember in the early part of 1979 that you talking about their towns were dead. 6 months later, when they started selling out, they wanted to change it all. For a measly extra 6% of the money?
Well, I think that was a stupid decision on their part, man. But, in this case, there's a war starting in my territory. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like a blessing from the good Lord to me, man, So I was in the first week of the only wrestling war I ever experienced in my time in wrestling. And I get these 6 big-name wrestlers that come home for good, and there's going to be more coming to follow them, too.
All right, as you said earlier, there really was a lot going on in Southeastern Knoxville. So how about the TV show to promote the card that we talked about earlier?
Well, this TV show is going to be a dramatic overnight change for the fans. They're used to seeing the same guys. And all of a sudden, this television is like, wow. It was a reintroduction of faces from the past. Some of them were extremely popular and some not so popular, the heels, But opening the show was a great example. It had Alexis Smirnoff and Gorgeous George Jr., who was now Smirnoff's manager. And Gorgeous George Jr., they had not seen on that TV in almost a year. They opened up with Les at the set. They watched a very short, less than 30-second video from 2 weeks earlier when Boris Malenko was managing the Southeastern champion, Smirnoff, in a match against Ronnie Garvin, in which Dick Slater was in Garvin's corner. But Malenko, because this war was coming up, he's supposed to be managing Smirnoff, but he actually causes Smirnoff to win. He holds his legs down while Ronnie Garvin has him pinned in his corner. And, and Ronnie ends up getting 3 counts. He leaves the ring and he takes our Southeastern belt with him. So Gigi told us, that he was now the new manager for Alexis Smirnoff, and he had already made a complaint to the Southeastern Board of Directors because nothing like that had ever happened. There's a guy that's managing one guy, and then he causes him to lose on purpose. And Gigi said he had demanded from the Board of Directors that a decision be reversed, that this new Russian protege of his be awarded a brand new Southeastern belt, not even the one that was the old belt. He had to have a new belt. And he said immediately. And so Les said, well, Georgia, he goes, we actually, they agree with you that, it was not a proper decision. And he goes, we've got a new Southeastern belt, and they brought out the new Southeastern belt. They handed it to GG. He put it around the waist of Smirnoff, and boy, did the studio get mad about that. The studio crowd, they didn't like it. But there was a brand new Southeastern belt around Smirnoff's waist. So both men stayed at the set with Les, and Smirnoff's first Southeastern title opponent was yes, and he had just received the belt, and he's already got it defended. And GD didn't like that. He said, wait a minute now, wait. He just got this belt, and why is it that he has to defend against, and who is it? And about that time, Jimmy Golden popped out of the dressing room. And wow, as soon as he walked into the studio, they popped. It had been a long time since they had seen Jimmy. So, wow, this program started off with a bunch of new people again. So the next guest at the set hadn't been seen in the Tennessee territory for almost 2 years. And that was Tony Charles. And wow, did he get a greeting from the fans, and then Tony watched the new United States junior champion, Kevin Sullivan, who was in the second TV match. Who wore that U.S. belt out to the ring, and Kevin got himself a victory. And then Charles had worn that belt many times before, and he was getting another shot at it the next Friday night. So the fans, in the early part of this show, they're seeing a lot of new people again. Then the personality profile featured 4 men that was left in the Bayliner boat tournament. That was Dick Slater, who was going to be wrestling against Crusher Blackwell the next Friday in one of those 2 semifinals. And I was going to be wrestling the Mongolian Stomper in the other. And the Stomper hadn't been seen on the Knoxville TV in almost a year. Slater, Blackwell and I, we sat down with Les at the set in the nice, comfy chairs and interviewed from those chairs. The Mongolian Stomper with his manager, Gorgeous George Jr., interviewed from Studio B. Then the third TV match was another homecoming of sorts. Mr. Fuji, who had been in Knoxville except for the last month. He'd only been over in Memphis for basically a month. He was coming back, and along with him came Tora Tanaka, man, who was a fan favorite in that part of the country. Tora hadn't been seen there in months. So they had the tag match as partners. It was their first time together on a Southeastern TV show. And wow, they looked unbeatable. They were a phenomenal team. Then the last TV match, I'm sure, brought back bad memories, more memories, but bad memories for the studio audience, as well as the people I'm sure watching at home. The Mongolian Stomper came out on the last match, managed by Gorgeous George Jr., and he stomped his way to another victory.
Now that's how you do a TV show right there. That's great TV. All six of the returning stars were on this show. So I doubt many fans missed the Knoxville 5. So before we get into the results of the card that this TV promoted, by the way, I got another question to ask. So did you ever get all your wrestlers together at this point, any point before maybe something had happened, to talk to them about what to expect and how you wanted them to deal with all of this upcoming war stuff?
Jason, that's one of your best questions yet, Dave. Yeah. And yeah, I did, man. I'd gotten both dressing rooms together on the night of the last card when those 5 wrestlers showed up at the building, but none of them wrestled, to talk a little bit about what was happening. But this time it was even more important. We kind of knew by this point, after seeing the flyers on the cars in the parking lot afterwards, what was going on. So on this night, June 15, 1979, I had no idea what to expect. I notified everybody in the company a couple of days earlier, no matter what their position they held, other than being a ticket seller, of course. They didn't need to be involved in this, to be at the main dressing room of the big amphitheater. We were wrestling in Chihuahua Park's amphitheater 1 hour prior to bell time. So I would talk to everybody, and it was a room full of people, right? And they were obviously extremely interested. This is their livelihood too. So I started the discussion basically with my experiences in the Atlanta War that had started in 1972, and I'd been a part of it. I had been in there and wrestled on a lot of cards for them. That war didn't end until 1974. So that war went on for at least 2 years. And I explained how both of the competing companies in that war didn't interfere in any way with the other company. How that they both ran in the Municipal Auditorium in downtown Atlanta on back-to-back nights. The NWA group ran on Friday night, and Gunkel's company ran on Saturday night. That they ran their TV shows on the same TV station that Ted Turner owned. And again, the shows were back-to-back. The TV show of the NWA was at 6 o'clock, and the Gunkel TV show was at 7. So it was probably, and then I explained to them, guys, that, it was probably one of the most dignified wrestling wars in history. And because of the way it was handled by both companies not interfering with each other, they both were successful during the course of the war. In fact, they sold out the building every Friday night for the NWA, and then Saturday night, the Gunkel's group would sell out the building. And when that war was over, the NWA wrestling business that survived there, eventually the NWA business won the war. But for maybe the first time ever after a wrestling war, both companies had been extremely successful. And then when they finished the war, NWA became even better, more powerful. Wrestling was even more solid after the war than it was before the war. And that was truly, truly a remarkable event. So I told them that after last week and the way that, all five of the wrestlers showed up, had our matches, I talked very candidly with everybody, how the guys sat in the crowd and they made themselves visible. And then they put the flyers on the customers' cars after the event was over. I said, it appears, man, that we're not going to have that kind of war here. It looks like our war is, we're not going to be lucky enough to have the war that Atlanta had. I said, obviously, I had no control over the other guys, the company, and what they did or what they were going to do even. And, and I told him, like tonight, I said, and all future nights, guys, we got to be ready for anything. I have no idea what to expect. And I told him, however, that we, on our behalf, were going to be in total control of what we were going to do. I said we weren't going to do anything to those guys at all. We were going to ignore them as if they didn't even exist, that they weren't even there, didn't even have any matches. And I told guys, I said, I'm not going to tolerate anybody having any problems, much less fights with these guys, no matter how much. I said, you can expect they want to. They'll want it because they'll want that bad publicity for us. Mm-hmm. And I said, we're going to take the high road. And anyone that had a problem with them and acted upon it, you're going to get an instant notice. So I'm not going to put up with it. I mean, I said, especially if it ends up in the newspaper or on TV, you're gone that day. And I basically said, guys, the best option here for all of us is to just stay totally clear of these guys. Mm-hmm. Leave them alone totally. And I said the only thing that we would do to them is if they were to enter this park right here or the Coliseum, come into our building and come into our ring. And I said, boys, if that happens, then we're going to take care of business as necessary. Mm-hmm. And I said, my last words to him is, I want to handle all of it, all of this whole matter with dignity. I want us to mind our own business, and ultimately we'll win the war if we do that.
Wow. I mean, I don't think you could have said that any better. That's modern day guerrilla warfare versus, 1979. So, I mean, it still applies today, and you had it right on track in 1979. All right. So speaking of winning, who won those Southeastern matches that night before they opened up?
Well, the Hollywood Connection, Dr. D. Schultz and Mansfield beat Dean Ho and Eddie Sullivan. Mr. Fucci took care of Burrhead Jones. Tor Tanaka got the win over Chick Donovan. Then in the United States Junior title match, Kevin Sullivan got a win over Tony Charles. But for the first time, Kevin had always been a babyface. Tony Charles was his toughest opponent so far for his U.S. Junior title. He won the match. He put his foot on the ropes to beat Tony Charles. And I think the fans didn't know really how to take that. They were like, wow, he won, but what? He cheated, right? So then Alexis Smirnoff was managed by Gorgeous George Jr. Had to get his manager involved to keep from losing, and he had to get disqualified to save his belt from Jimmy Golden. Jimmy was at the top of his game, man, and they loved him, man. They were so glad to see him back. Then Crusher Blackwell and Dick Slater wrestled, and I mean they wrestled. There was not a punch thrown to a great 30-minute time limit draw. And that was the first of the semifinal matches that ended up in a draw. The Mongolian Stomper, managed by GG, won his match over me.
Wow. All right. So if Slater and Blackwell ended in a draw and Stomper won, who was in the finals the next week for the boat?
Well, Dave, a good booker has to sometimes things go awry. All three of those guys were going to be in it. It was going to be a first ever round robin finals. The Stomper, Slater, and Blackwell were all three going to be against each other.
Wow.
No, the way we're going to do it is a hat was going to be brought out with all three of their names in it. It would be brought to the ring. The first guy, everybody got to pick a name out of the hat. The first one that picked his own name out of the hat, he got to pick the first guy he was going to wrestle, his first opponent.
Ah.
And the winner of that match then wrestled against the third man who was waiting on the apron in the corner of the ring.
Mm-hmm.
And that process was going to continue until one man was able to beat both of the opponents back to back. And in other words, the first man to win 2 straight matches won the both.
Well, that's a cool idea. I don't think I've seen it done that, or at that time for sure, seen it done that way. That could last a while or end after just 2 matches. So how did you come up with that stuff?
Well, wrestlers, especially bookers, man, had a strange mind. and I guess, man, I got 3 guys here. What are going to do? And that seemed like a great idea to do it that way. And that was the sad part of the night, man. There was a war going on now, and many fans in those days, it was. We had to do some strange things.
All right. So were you happy with attendance? How'd you feel about that on this return kind of?
Well, man, that was the worst part of the night. Obviously I knew that it was not going to remain a big, huge crowd. You've got another company that's going to be there the next night with some matches. So, with the war going on and, the fans, didn't have enough money, a lot of them to go to both those matches. So you knew that they were going to pick and choose which match they were going to go to.
Yeah.
So, and that's basically what happened. I figured this type of card, if we hadn't had a war, we'd probably had 4,000 to 5,000 people there in the amphitheater. Pretty night it was too. We end up with only 2,800 people.
Wow, you're kidding. I can't believe it was that small. Because you basically own the territory for how many years? So you said you would give us their all-star card for the next night. So who was on it and what was their attendance? How did they do versus what you put up?
Well, they had a lot fewer matches. They had 4 matches. They had Ron and Don Wright. Ron and his brother, who had not wrestled in a long time. Ron and Don Wright wrestled against a guy called Chief Black Eagle, who I had never heard of, and Devoid Brunson, who was basically a job guy for us for many, many years. Every once in a while, I got to wrestle on TV. Then Bob Roop wrestled against a guy named Joe Sims that I had never heard of. Then they had a 6-man tag with the Great Malenko, and he had 2 unknown assassins as his partner. It was not Jody Hamilton, I can tell you that, or anybody that I knew. Any of the guys that we had the 2 assassins down in the Southeastern Gulf Coast. It was just 2 guys. Everybody could be an assassin, basically, if you had a black mask and a black outfit. So it was Great Malenko and 2 assassins. Against, they advertised Mr. Wrestling number 2, but it was not Mr. Wrestling 2. I mean, he was a huge star in Atlanta. I was lucky to get him for some shows, much less them get him. So it was the Malenko and the 2 assassins against Mr. Wrestling 2, a guy called Hoot Gibson, and Terry Gibbs, who was one of the former Southeastern wrestlers. Mm-hmm. And he had at the last minute decided to go with those guys. So he was on the card there too. Their main event was for our Southeastern belt. It wasn't even their belt. And it was the same one that Ronnie Garvin had left the ring with after Malenko held down Smirnoff's leg a couple weeks earlier in the Coliseum. So Garvin was going to be defending our belt against Bob Orton Jr., and, I got to thinking about it. That had to probably be maybe the 10th or 20th time those 2 guys had wrestled for Southeastern against each other. So I didn't have actual access to their attendance. I had no way of knowing exactly what they do. Obviously, I knew what was in there when it was us and having the matches. But I had a friend that I really trusted that went to both these shows, and he said that he had been to the show our night before, and then he was at their show the next night, and he said the crowd for their first night was about 1/3 as large as what we had. So if we had about 2,800, they probably had maybe 1,000 fans.
All right, I got to say, this is all so fascinating. But before we take our break, was there anything else that happened on this week that was unexpected leading up to any of this?
Oh, yeah, man. There certainly was, Dave. I'm glad you asked this one, too, man. This is there was a weekly small piece in the Knoxville newspaper in the sports section. Every week it ran, and they ran it right next to the ads for our wrestling matches, and it was a little forum for readers that wanted to write a little something and get something in the paper. It was called Right or Wrong. But it wasn't the word right, RIGHT. It was WRITE. It was a nice little play on words, right or wrong. And you could write that whatever you wanted to talk about and say anything basically that you wanted to. And it happened to be placed right next to our ads every Friday. So I always looked every Friday at the paper, naturally. I had spent the money for the paper advertising. I wanted to see what the ad looked like. And then I always glanced over at this little right or wrong article there, the subject, see kind of what they were talking to, whoever. And there had never been anything in it. Been there 5 years. There'd never been anything in that right or wrong little article about wrestling in all those years since I had been there. So on this day, June 15th, 1979, the night that we're wrestling out there, they're going to be there the next night. The subject was wrestling. I was like, geez, I can't believe this, right? Out of nowhere, right? And he was a fan. And this fan had obviously been instructed by their group to send this letter in, and they had a lot of friends. They had been there for a lot of years wrestling, Garvin especially, and I had never made it public since my start in Southeastern that I had anything to do with the ownership of the company. Because, as you can imagine, it would have been extremely awkward to be the wrestler and then you own the company too.
Right.
So that was all, and that wasn't unusual. That was the case in so many territories because so many wrestlers owned wrestling companies. Right. And they didn't want it to get out that they did. It was kind of like the kiss of death when that happened, for some information like that to become public. And definitely no fan out there had any idea, about what was going on, And on this morning, I look over there and there it was. And the news from the fan was that I was not only the owner of Southeastern Wrestling, but I was in control of who won and lost the matches and what the wrestlers got paid. So I instantly knew this didn't come from, it could have only come from one source, right?
You got to be kidding, Stud. Come on.
I wish I was, man.
On the night of your matches and one day before they have their first event, an article like that appears in the newspaper. I mean, I don't think they could have done anything any worse than that. So that was something even detrimental to their own business that they were trying to start. Dude, I called you dude. Stud, you just dropped a bomb on us right there. That's crazy. All right, so I'm sure there's no wrestling podcast anywhere in the world that's going to give fans this kind of look behind the kayfabe curtain, and we've definitely pulled it back today. So, wow, this is crazy. All right, what a way to end the first segment on this Studcast. It's time for our break. We'll do that when we return. We'll be down in the Southeastern Gulf Coast territory where hopefully, and I'm pretty sure the subject matter and the wrestlers will be completely different. We'll do that. This Studcast continues in a moment. All right, Studcast fans, Ron has discovered your sweet spot on his YouTube Southeastern Rewind channel. His short rides with the stud have become the most popular edition ever. If you've not subscribed to YouTube Southeastern Rewind for free, and we mean free, classic short videos from Gulf Coast, Southeastern, Continental, and USA TV shows. You better do it today. Subscribe now. They are seen nowhere else on YouTube, and 2 or 3 new ones are added each week. It's the best deal in wrestling. Subscribe today and ride into wrestling history with the stud on YouTube and Southeastern Rewind. All right, Studcast fans, welcome back. Another Studcast with the Tennessee stud, Ron Fuller. Hey, y'all, I'm David Summers. Thanks for being here with us. Here we go. And after that bomb you dropped on us a couple of minutes ago, stud, the rest of this Studcast should be a little easier to hear. We're back down south, and things were certainly a lot more calm than up north in the Knoxville area. So why don't we start the ride here with the card for Montgomery, Mobile, and Dothan, all in the same week as the one we just discussed in Tennessee. So how about the card for June 11th in Montgomery, June 13th in Mobile, and then June 15th, all 1979, in Dothan, Alabama?
Well, it opened with, man, the very popular Ricky Fields against the Inferno. The last week we had 2 Infernos, only one on this card. Terry Latham faced off against Herb Calvert in the second match on the card. Ron Slinker, who had just lost his Southeastern belt, was going up against the new great heel man in the Southeastern Gulf Coast territory, Austin Idol. The new Southeastern champion that had beaten Slinker for the belt, managed by Billy Spears, was defending against the always popular Wrestling Pro. In a special 6-man tag, world-famous Bobo Brazil and the Dargon twins were facing the Samoans and Eddie Sullivan, managed by Billy Spears.
Wow.
Main event was a Texas death match with a special stipulation. If the Hulk won the match in less than 15 minutes, he'd get 5 minutes alone with Billy Spears. So it was Terry the Hulk Boulder against Ox Baker. And if he could beat Baker in 15 minutes, he got 5 minutes with Spears.
Wow. All right, that's a great card. A Southeastern title match. One of the most famous stars in the world, Bobo Brazil, no less, making his debut. And a Texas death match where Billy Spears could end up in the ring alone with the Hulk. So what about the TV that set this whole thing up?
Well, it opened, man, with the wild ending of the last TV match from the week before, where almost every wrestler in the building, man, ended up in the ring. Wow, it was crazy. And so the Hulk was at the set, and he watched this piece. It was probably about the last minute and a half of that the last match on the last TV show. He sat there and watched it with Charlie, and then after the video, Hulk went to the ring. He had the first match. He obviously got himself another strong win. He used his bear hug. Then it was Austin Idol in the second match. But Austin went to the set with Charlie Platt before the match started. And Charlie informed him that, basically, hey, you're not scheduled to be here at the set with me, and you're supposed to be in the ring. You need to go on to the ring. He asked him basically to leave and go to the ring. So Idol got extremely upset about it, and he didn't leave. Obviously, he tore into Charlie, man. He said, he told Charlie that he was right. He said, you said I wasn't supposed to be at the set, and he said I'm also not supposed to ever win the Southeastern Championship either, am I? He said, because, but it's going to happen. He said, it doesn't make any difference. He said, it don't make any difference whether Charlie Platt or whether the Georgia Cracker president, Jimmy Carter, who lives in the next state over there, or the big man above pointing up at the sky. He goes, whatever. It doesn't make a difference what any of you want. He said, it was still going to happen, and very soon. And then he went to a ring, man. He had a roar of boos from the studio crowd. He cranked everybody up. I'm sure he cranked Charlie up, too. So Charlie told me later that Idol got the most heat yet after that tirade. And then he said he got even more heat because he went in the ring. He won the match with the figure 4 leg lock, and then he refused to let go of the hold. And referee Larry Brock was the referee, had finally to force him to untie his legs. And then he just got up and he stood over the guy that was laying there holding his legs and basically crying. And he stood there and laughed when they carried him out of the ring. So,
wow.
I got him a good little second match. He took care of that part of the card for sure.
I'll say. All right. So how about the personality profile, Stud?
Well, Louis picked the perfect guy for that, man. And you didn't get an opportunity to do a personality profile with someone like him very often. Not this guy. He brought Bobo Brazil on there with Charlie, and he was on live with Charlie, right, sitting in next to the bleachers with the fans there. And I've been friends with Bobo Brazil since 1973. The year we both spent a lot of time working in St. Louis. Basically, every other Friday night when St. Louis ran, I could depend that Bobo would be somewhere on that card. And we spent a lot of time together, stayed in the same hotel, became really close friends. And we kept in touch long after that 1973 year. And he always said, Ron, I tell you, we talked about, I said, I want to have my own territory, Bobo, someday. He said, Ron, I'll come and wrestle for you, man. You ever get your own territory, I'll come and wrestle for you. So here he was. He kept his word. And, wow, he was an extremely rare talent. And he was recognized all over the world. And maybe as the best wrestler ever. Certainly he was one of them, And Bobo had a vibrant personality, man, just as much as he had the ability he had as a wrestler. He was such an outgoing person. So it was what Les and I basically had designed these personality profiles for. Way back when we decided on the format for the Southeastern show. This was a rare opportunity for fans to get to know a huge star in about 5 minutes. These things last about 5 minutes usually. So Bobo was so good. He engaged the fans on the bleachers near him, he was he and Charlie, he had everybody laughing. He told a couple of quick little stories about his worldwide wrestling experience. He put Southeastern wrestling on, saying that it was one of the best places on earth to wrestle. And then he went in the ring with these doggone twins, who certainly weren't in his category, man. They were going to be his partners for this entire week in these 6-man tags. And Charlie said, boy, that Bobo tore the studio up, man. And, he said he'd never seen. He said he saw instantly what Bobo was all about. He was like, "Wow, Ron!" He had those people going nuts. He said that when they tagged out to the doggone twins, he said the house they all shut up until Bobo got tagged.
So. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Bobo he was a phenomenal guy, a phenomenal athlete, a phenomenal wrestler. And, wow, I was so lucky to have him come down. The only part that disappointed me is I was up north and I didn't even get to see him in the entire week. But he was there nonetheless.
What would you really put your thumb on about Bobo? Was it, obviously we know he was so exciting around the fans, loved being on the microphone and talking to folks and making sure that they were going to fill the seats. But what was it about his wrestling ability? Was it so many years of experience or just the excellence that he executed? What was it about his wrestling skills?
He was just phenomenal. I mean, he was a tremendous wrestler, but he was a dancer. Wow, I think that was Bobo's gimmick. I mean, he would do a really cute move, and then he would dance for 2 minutes. So it was something. He was totally different than anybody else.
It's just my luck.
And, that was what really made him great. Nobody was a Bobo.
Just my luck. I missed that one. He was definitely an icon of the sport, no doubt about it. So, all right, how about the last match on that TV?
Well, the big man himself, man, that had opened the show, the Hulk, man. was in the last match, and he put his bear hug on another opponent and had the guy screaming, just like he had every week he'd been on TV. Nobody was going to get out of that bear hug. And he had this guy screaming, and just like the week before, it all started the week before, he had a bear hug on his opponent, and Baker and Billy Spears came, and then the ring filled up with people. Here, as soon as Hulk put the squeeze on his opponent, here came Ox and Billy Spears, charged into the ring. But this time the Hulk was ready for him. They didn't catch him from behind. So he dropped the guy that he had who had already give up. And he just grabbed Ox Baker, who was running, charging him, and grabbed him by the back of the head and just kept him running, threw him over the top rope out on the floor. And then he got Billy Spears trapped into the corner, man. Billy tried to get out of the ring and cut off his escape route. And then he slowly trapped him in the corner, man. The studio was going wild. And so Spears, got down on both knees, and he was praying to Mama. And then, when Hulk reached for him, Ox Baker came back into the ring. Along came the Gladiator, Eddie Sullivan, some of Spears' troop, stormed the ring, and then Hulk kind of fought those guys off, but he never really got Spears. He never got to put his hands on Billy Spears. Yeah. So Hulk finished off the live interview with a live interview that went into every market. We didn't do that very often, but he was going to be doing the same match in all three of the cities. And he said he had the match he wanted. This was Ox Baker. This was a Texas death match. He said, I got 15 minutes to get Ox Baker in my bear hug and hurt him so bad that when I turn him loose, and it's my 5 minutes with the weasel, Billy Spears, he goes, Ox Baker ain't going to be able to get up to help him, and then he said, I'm going to do something that somebody should have done to Billy Spears many, many years ago. He said, I'm going to squeeze the life out of Billy Spears. He goes, I want to end that worthless career of his. And Charlie said the roof was coming off the building. He had them popping and popping and popping. He was beginning to become the Hulk. He was beginning to learn a little bit about how to make a great interview.
Mm-hmm. So it really sounds like just a great TV show as the one in Knoxville. So what happened in the big arenas that next week?
Well, Ricky Fields won his match over the Inferno, who was Curtis Smith, one of the original great Infernos. Tony Latham beat Herb Calvert. Ron Slinker got beat by the undefeated Austin Idol, who had not lost a match since he came to Southeastern. The Gladiator, managed by Billy Spears, retained his newly won Southeastern belt over the Wrestling Pro. Gladiator took care of the Pro. Then in the Bobo Brazil and Argon Twins, they lost to the Samoans and Eddie Sullivan, managed by Billy Spears. But Louis said, Bobo, he said, Ron, he said, they might have lost the match, he goes, but Bobo was a winner every night. He said, those buildings were going crazy. He said, those fans absolutely loved him. And he said he looked so good. He said, they made the Argon Twins look so bad. He goes, I lost interest in him. He said, it was like, he said, I was so disappointed with him, that I just basically gave up on him, because he said it was just like the TV match. When they tagged in Bobo, the building stood up. When they tagged him in, they sat down, and he said, I gave him a 2-week notice. And he said, Ron, also, and I hate to tell you this, he said, but I also gave Bobo all my thanks and an extra $500 for the week.
Wow.
And I thanked him. I said, that's a great idea, Louis. I mean, I know he earned it.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, my God. He said, he told me, he said, Ron, I had never seen Bobo work in my career.
Wow.
And he said, and until you sent him down here. And he said, any booker in the world, and he said, I could see any booker in the world and any territory in the world could get this guy over, and he would make you so much money. He said he was a phenomenon.
Wow.
So the main event was just about what the Hulk needed, man. Just about everything the Hulk needed back, basically. He got a good solid win over a big name star, Ox. And it couldn't have happened, and it wouldn't have happened if Ox hadn't been leaving for Japan. You couldn't do that kind of job if you were going to be there the week after that. So, Ox is gone for 5 weeks. And we did the same finish everywhere because the major cities were so far apart. We didn't have to worry about the fans driving from one city to another because they probably had already seen this match in their hometown. But we did change it in Mobile. We changed the finish in Mobile because we wanted to build towards something else. So the finish in Mobile was different than in the other two cities. It was different than anybody had expected, man. It was a great finish. Hulk beat Ox in the Texas Death Match in less than 15 minutes. And then he left him laying, just like he said he was going to do in his interview, out there on the floor. And then he got his 5 minutes with Spears. But Spears ran during 4 minutes of the 5 minutes, outside the ring, back in, back out, back in. He never got to touch him until about the last, with about 1 minute left. And about a minute left on the match, he got Billy Spears in the bear hug. Well, you can imagine what the building did. They went absolutely nuts. And then the Samoans headed for the ring. Obviously, they're watching, and they know their guy, their managers up there. They better be ready to help him. So they headed to the ring to help Billy. But Ricky Fields and Terry Latham, those boys that had wrestled against those Samoans so many times in a row, they were expecting it too, and they headed for the ring about the same time. All four of those guys, they got into a fight outside on the floor. Then Hulk finally had Spears in his bear hug, and then along came Austin Allen, who had not had any interference of any kind up to this point. He hit the ring and then went straight to Hulk. He busted him, man. He hit him with something that he had on his fist. Hulk was bleeding. It was one of the first times the fans had seen Hulk bleed, as a matter of fact. Then Eddie Sullivan came along about the same period, about the same time. But instead of going after the Hulk, which he didn't need to, Idol was working on the Hulk. Spears went after Larry Brock, the referee. Larry got to stop him, and he just he popped Larry, he busted Larry open, and then he pile drived him, and he left him laying there. So Billy been in the bear hug for less than a minute. He was laying there. I'm sure he thought he was dead. And he crawled out to the edge of the ring, and his tag champions jerked him out, and Sullivan too. Then Austin Idol went trailing along behind the group to get back to the dressing room. Pretty hard to get back to the dressing room with that type of thing in Mobile. The next week's card, man, is going to be headlined by Idol against the Hulk. The Samoans versus Fields and Latham in the title match. And then we're going to have a very unusual match as referee Larry Brock is going to find himself a partner, take on Sullivan and Spears. And his partner, Dave, is going to be a four-legged one. He's going to have as a partner Ginger the Wrestling Bear.
Are you kidding, Stud? You're at it again. You got to be kidding. Larry Brock is going to partner with a bear on our next Studcast.
He certainly is, man. And the odd thing about that is this bear had the same name as my grandfather Roy's bear, Ginger.
Yeah, that's what I thought, yeah.
And, Ginger, man, Roy's bear had traveled with Roy all over North America, man, from 1940. She started in 1940 and wrestled on into the 1950s, man. Wow. So, we're going to have a bear. Yeah, we're going to have a bear, and he's going to be partnered with Larry Brock, of all people.
All right, I'll tell you what, Stud. This Studcast has a little bit of everything in it. A wrestling war that is apparently going to get out of hand compared to other wars, of course. Cards from 3 wrestling companies, fans having their say in the newspaper, and now a bear is wrestling in the next Studcast. All right, I'm sorry, but we overextended ourselves. We're not going to have time for a learning tree question today. Imagine that, out of time with all that you've heard today. Just one more question for me. So where do we ride on the next Studcast, Ron?
Well, Tennessee's, man, is getting at Bayliner boat finals, man. It's going to be in round-robin fashion with 3 men, all against all. There's also going to be a one-night Southeastern tag team tournament because we've got these 2 former champions that aren't with us anymore. So we're going to crown new tag champions next week. And in that tournament, I'm going to have a very special partner, and it's not going to be my brother. I'm going to be wrestling with my father. So then the war will be back for the 2nd week in a row. Another fan sent something into the Right or Wrong, the little newspaper article that I talked about this week. And a great guy, great gentleman, man, that is a tremendous historical document guy. He has all these things. He found for me the second one of these messages that were sent in that little Right or Wrong newspaper article sent in from another fan. And I'm going to read that one. And the next Studcast, what was actually said on one of these from the fans themselves. And then we're going to head down south. Man, things are obviously still rocking down there. The Hulk and Austin, their war's about to begin between the 2 of them. And we're going to find out how referee Larry Brock is going to handle his partner, Genius the Bear, in the special match against Billy Spears, Eddie Sullivan.
Yeah, there's one thing to be said about wrestling a bear, but partnering with a bear, I wonder how that's going to go. Listen, I can't help it, but I have to say it again. These Studcasts just keep on getting better. I already can't wait for next week. All right, folks on Facebook, you know the deal. Go to Ron Fuller Welch, the Tennessee Stud on Facebook. Like and follow him there to become friends with a living legend. On Twitter, same thing. Find him on Twitter at Ron Fuller Welch and follow him there too. Check out his website, tnstud.com, for every Studcast ever done, including this one. 43 Super Studcast and the Stud Store. All kinds of souvenirs. Get your personally autographed copy of the novel Brutus right there. The YouTube channel from Ron, Southeastern Rewind, is red hot, closing in on 300 hours of video. The last 82 Studcast, 52 Stud Stories, now 43 short rides with the Stud, and 5 Ask the Stud question and answer shows. Subscribe now on YouTube. It's called Southeastern Rewind. YouTube Southeastern Rewind, of course, is the gateway to ClassicContinentalWrestling.com, the Stud's tremendous streaming channel. There are now more than 250 hours of classic wrestling entertainment. It's all there. Gulf Coast, Southeastern, Continental, and USA TV shows, all in the order which they were recorded, and that's the way it was meant to be. ClassicContinentalWrestling.com. Plus, we're not done. 19 chapters of Ron's audio version of his best-selling lion novel, Brutus, 6 stars of the sport, 4 superstars of the past, and documentaries with something new every day. All of this, $4.99 per month, plus the free 1-week trial is still available. That's ClassicContinentalWrestling.com. It is the best deal in wrestling. All right. Any final words, Stud?
Well, just to thank you, man, to all our fans out there, as always, for your great support and everything, and they support us in everything we do. Pretty amazing, Dave. We have some tremendous fans, and I hope all of you come back next week and join us again. Please take care of yourselves and others, and may God bless us all.
For Ron Fuller in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, I'm David Summers saying thank you for listening. Find me at davidsummersproductions@gmail.com. This Studcast is a David Summers production for Tennessee Stud, LLC.
Thanks for joining us today for this historic Studcast. The true story continues next week. So full Nelson your friends and point them in our direction for another ride with the Tennessee Stud.
1, 2, 3.
This is David Summers saying so long from the Great Smoky Mountains.